A problem I've always had with psychologists, therapists, life coaches, etc. is that so often their advice doesn't line up with real life. For example, on the question of how to tell somebody to stop bothering you to meet an impossible deadline, they might suggest saying something like, "I hear your point of view, but your insistence on this unachievable goal and lack of consideration for the time constraints is putting me in danger of burnout." There are two big problems with this. Firstly, no one talks like that, including the expert that just gave you that advice. Human communication just doesn't work by plainly stating things in a sort of cookie-cutter phrase that sounds like it came from an HR training seminar, even in an office. And we all know that. Secondly, it's nothing new to say that most communication is nonverbal. And that's actually the main reason why nobody talks in cookie-cutter phrases. We almost never attempt to express everything we want to communicate just with words. If you don't believe me, let's look at the following scenario. A kid who doesn't know any better pets a dog too hard. Now, a dog has exactly 0 words it can use to say no. But I think you would agree that it is able to communicate the idea. In fact, I would argue that a dog has at least 10 ways to say no. In a future video, we'll look at these options and compare them to the options that people have when it comes to pushing back. So subscribe if you'd like to see that. For now though, consider some of these other factors that can influence your communication aside from verbal content. The face, eye contact, visible expressions, micro expressions, pupil dilation, among other things. The body, position, posture, direction, gestures, movement, tension. The voice, speed, pitch, tone, stability, timbre, volume. And then contextual actions, the various different ways you can interact with your physical environment and other people around you. When you consider all the other factors that contribute to communication, you realize that simply giving somebody advice on verbal content alone and acting like you've given them all the information they need for that situation, well, it's a bit like handing somebody your favorite brand of chocolate and acting like you've given them a recipe for brownies. I'm not saying that verbal content is irrelevant. It's often an important piece of the puzzle. But yeah, knowing whether to bake the brownies for 30 minutes or 3 hours is pretty important. Probably more so than the chocolate. The point of this little speech is to say that when you're thinking about how to approach a situation in life, it's more useful to think about what you do holistically in terms of moves, not just words. In our video on social dominance archetypes, we talked about 3 categories of moves: moves of aggression, influence, and fortification. By the end of this video, you should start to have a better idea of what these moves are and how you might use them. To consciously approach any social challenge, it's useful to ask yourself the following 3 questions. What resources do I have? Why am I acting? And how can I use the resources that I have to achieve the outcome that I want? These might all sound kind of obvious on the face of it, but it's amazing how often we totally fail to act on this basis. We'll start with the question, what resources do I have? In the first video in this series, we laid out our formula for social dominance and described the 3 traits that it's made up of. Now, these are not permanent and will vary from one situation to another, but if you want to get an idea of your natural propensity for these traits, I recommend you start by taking a 5-factor model personality test online. That will give you scores out of 100 in each of the 5 factors. For our extroversion trait level, just take the 5-factor model extroversion score. For our range trait level, subtract the agreeableness score from 100 and multiply by 8. Then take the openness score and multiply by 2. Finally, divide all this by 10. For our stability trait level, subtract your neuroticism score from 100. In our second video in this series, we introduced some archetypes of social dominance based on these traits. So using your levels of each trait, you can get an idea of which archetype might be most likely to reflect you in most situations. So that would be the most calculated approach if you want to be kind of objective about how you are. But one thing to bear in mind with this approach is that these archetypes aren't permanent. You'll probably have a tendency to play different roles in different situations, because these traits are relative to other people. Just to throw out a simplistic job-based stereotype, you may be the extrovert in the room with a group of computer engineers, but the introvert in the room when among salespeople. So what you can also do is just make an on-the-fly assessment of whether you're more toward high or low in each of the categories, and by implication, which of the archetypes you might be closer to. And not many people have the self-awareness to honestly assess where they sit in a social situation, and that causes all kinds of problems. So this is a very useful exercise if you're able to do it somewhat objectively. Why am I acting? Now that you have an idea of what resources you have to draw on, it's worth thinking about how you actually want the situation to turn out. We're often so caught up in instinctive reactions that we don't take the time to consider what outcome we really want from a situation. Here are some examples of the kind of questions you might want to consider. Is it more important for me in this situation to be respected or to be liked? If short-term conflict arises from my actions, am I going to be able to deal with that? If longer-term conflict arises from my actions, am I going to be able to deal with that? Is it important for me to persuade and influence others in this situation? Or is it more about enforcing my own boundaries? And then the third question, given the resources that I have, how can I make best use of them to achieve the outcome that I want? Again, this will depend on the resources you have and the outcome you want, but you may find yourself asking questions like, is there a way of persuading and influencing or of enforcing my boundaries that doesn't require conflict? If I compensate for my lack of one trait by focusing on another, is this going to be likely to provide the outcome that I want? So granted, these questions sound kind of vague at this point, but in future videos, we'll look at specific social challenges and some of the moves available, and based on your traits and desired outcomes, which of them might be the best choice for you. So again, subscribe if you're interested in that. For now, let's take a quick look at the three categories of moves. Moves of influence. The aim of moves of influence is to get other people on your side, whether that's by means of charm and initiative, vulnerability and inspiring sympathy, or just by giving out positive vibes. Most often, these moves are a little more suited to individuals high in extroversion. Moves of aggression. The aim of moves of aggression is to use force to set the boundaries of behavior in an interaction, whether that's by expanding your own range of actions or restricting that of others. Typically, these moves are more suited to individuals high in range. Moves of fortification. The aim of moves of fortification is to fortify yourself in such a way that you're unaffected by others' moves of aggression, whether that comes through a shift of perspective, strength of mind, or your situational setup. Typically, these moves are more suited to individuals with a high level of stability. We often lack perspective in the heat of challenging social situations. If you're aware of the moves available to you, hopefully it will help you to be a little more objective in your actions and lead you to an outcome you're happy with. The next time you encounter a difficult social situation, try to remember to ask yourself the following three questions. What resources do I have? Why am I acting? And given the resources that I have, how can I achieve the outcome that I want? Thanks for watching. See you soon.